So we are now started officially, and welcome to Seed Saving Basics with Lisa Conroy. And we're hoping that you're at the right session. My name's Steve Tedesco, and I'm your Zoom host today from Transition Guelph. And we're thrilled to have Lisa here as part of the 10th annual festival, which is just amazing that it's had this longevity. It would have been the 11th this year, except last year we had to cancel for obvious reasons. It's the first time we've held the festival virtually. We've learned a lot. Our capabilities are quite a bit more significant now in the past. And I encourage you to visit the festival website. We still have a handful of events left today, including the Potluck Earth Hour dinner tonight at 6. So if you're interested, still can sign up. So before I introduce our speaker, there's a few housekeeping items. Please stay on mute to minimize disruptions. For this session, Lisa would like to keep questions to the end, and then I'm sure we can do a live Q&A at that point. And once this session is over, we'll be posting it to our new festival website. I suspect it'll be about a week. Our web designer has to do all that work, but you might be able to find it sooner if you go onto YouTube and look for Transition Guelph's YouTube channel. And then finally, please be respectful, kind, and generous during the session. Especially during these tough times. It's always good to try and keep a positive outlook. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Conroy. She's the farm educator at Ignatius Farm, the past coordinator of the Guelph Seed Library, and current member of the Guelph Seed Library Steering Committee. Lisa has run her own small farm just outside of Guelph and has been playing with seed saving for many years. And she runs the Ignatius Farm New Farmer Training Program, which is absolutely brilliant. And I'd also like to mention that Lisa was recognized last fall by Transition Guelph with a Resiliency Award for all the great things she's been doing in the community. So Lisa, with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to you. You can do your screen share, and away we go.
Steve, we should have tried this before, but it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Sorry about that. I just made you co-host.
No problem. Okay. Welcome everybody, and thanks for coming to Seed Saving Basics. I'm going to give you just a really quick overview of our Ignatius New Farmer Training Program. And this program is hoping to help folks build a foundation to start a successful farm enterprise. And you don't need to be wanting to become a farmer. You could be a backyard gardener, just interested in agriculture. You can sign up for the whole each term at a time, or you can just do one-off sessions. Term 1 starts in April, and we've got a bunch of great webinars lined up for you. April is an intensive, so there are 2 per day, April 21st, 23rd, 26th, and 28th. And if you are interested in finding out more information or signing up, you can go to efao.ca/events and look for the Ignatius Farm New Farmer Training Program. And the program is a collaboration between the Ignatius Jesuit Center, the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario, and Everdale. And this webinar is also brought to you by the Guelph Seed Library. And we have a collection of seeds that we have either bought or people have saved. It is free to join. Anybody can take out seeds and anybody can donate seeds. We're part of the Guelph Tool Library, which is located in the Old Quebec Street Mall. And the best way to get in touch is to email info@guelphtoolllibrary.org. I'll also have that at the end. You can also join our Facebook group. It's Guelph Seed Library. and you can ask all kinds of questions, and we also take seed requests right now via the Facebook group. So seed saving basics. I guess I said keep questions to the end, but if you want to in the chat, just maybe post, why do you want to save seeds? I'm interested to know what everyone's, I guess, interest is in seed saving, and whether you've saved seeds before. So I will also talk a bit about plant taxonomy and pollination, as well as population size and types of isolation when you're planning your garden for seed saving, some harvesting and cleaning the seed, storing seeds, and testing seeds for viability. And then we can have questions at the end. So, I don't know, I guess I can't see the chat while I'm in presentation mode. So maybe that's not gonna work. Some of the reasons I like to save seeds. I'm looking to maintain heirloom varieties that my family's been saving. Oh, here, now I can see the chat. Saving seeds for a small farm, interested in heritage urban tree seeds. Oh, Andrew. Well, I don't know a lot about tree seeds, but I'll touch on it a little bit. You can save some money if you're saving your own seeds. Maybe you're looking to rebel against those large seed companies to increase seed sovereignty. And I think seed saving is fun. It's a way to get really involved in what you're growing. So this is just if you had to leave this webinar right now, this is what you need to know. You need to start small. Start with saving 1 or 2 seeds at a time, crops. So you don't get overwhelmed, because saving from different plants can be, you've got different techniques you're using, and it can be overwhelming. So I say start small, find out what plant family and species they're from, because plants in the same species can cross-pollinate, and maybe you're okay with this, but maybe you're not. And think about how much space you have and how many plants you'll need to maintain to get viable seed. Are you just in your backyard and you can only have, 4 plants? Is that enough to get viable seed? Or do you have several acres? Think about how long it will take to get seeds from that crop. Can you leave the crop in the ground that long? Some seeds, you're thinking, okay, lettuce, when I grow lettuce, I get lettuce in like 30 days. But if you want to save seeds from that lettuce, you have to leave that lettuce plant in the ground and let it flower and let it dry and then get the seeds. So, maybe you don't want to have those sitting in your backyard for that long. So a bit about plant classification. Why do you need to know? Because plants in the same species will cross-pollinate. And there are often different varieties within the same species. And sometimes they may not look like they're part of the same family or the same species. Plants in the same family will have similar growing and flowering structures, and this can help you plan what seeds you want to save. So really brief, high-level taxonomy. You've got your family. So in this example, I'm using squash and cucumber and melons. And so they're all part of the family Cucurbitaceae. Cucurbitaceae. Genus then comes below, and that's where it divides between squash in the cucurbita, and the cucumis is melons and cucumbers. So already you're separating, those won't cross. And then when you get down into the species, you've got 4 different species there in the squash, and then you've got your melons and your cucumbers. So what you need to look at is in the species, anything that's in one of those species will cross. So for example, in the variety there, you've got acorn squash and zucchini. If you have those planted in your garden, they will probably cross. You don't always get a cross, but if the bees are going to both plants, you will probably get a cross. And you won't see that cross in the first year. You'll get zucchini and you'll get acorn and it'll taste delicious, but if you save the seeds from those, they have the genetic material from both parent plants. And so when you grow them out, they could be some really weird looking squash or hard skinned zucchini. So pollination methods, we've got self-pollinating crops, we've got insect pollinated crops, and we have wind pollinated crops. And so it's good to know how the crop that you want to save seeds from gets pollinated, because if it's self-pollinated, you're probably fine growing, 5 different varieties in a small space. And maybe you'll get a cross, but probably not. If it's insect pollinated, you're probably going to get a cross in a small space. But if you can separate things by, several hundred feet, or you've got things to distract the bees so they're not going from one to another, you can isolate that way. Wind, there's not really much you can do. I will talk about barriers though, for those wanting to isolate for wind pollinated crops. Another thing that we need to know about when we're seed saving is open pollinated versus hybrid seed. So open pollinated seed is seed that's plants that are pollinated naturally within and between plants of the same variety. And hybrid seed is crops that are pollinated between plants of different varieties. So let's say you've got a black crim cherry tomato and a red fox cherry tomato, and you think that the red fox tastes really good, but the black crim has a really great color. You can try to cross those hybrid plants and get this new one that you're going to call red crim. But if you save the seeds from that new crop, new plant that you've made, it will have the genetic material from those parents. And so saving the seed, you won't necessarily get the same one that you had when you crossed them. So pollination and creating a seed. Pollination is sexual reproduction. It's the pollen fertilizes the seeds within the fruit. So the pollen is transferred from the anther to the stigma. So self-pollination is pollination that occurs within the same flower. So the flower has both male and female parts. And cross-pollination is pollen moving from one flower to another. So we also need to know that there are different types of flowers. We have perfect flowers that have both male and female reproductive parts, and those tend to be plant crops that are self-pollinating. And then we have imperfect flowers that have male and female flowers, and sometimes they're both on the same plant, like squash, and sometimes you have some plants with male flowers and some plants with female flowers, like spinach. And then we also have closed flowers. It's a perfect flower that has a closed shape, and it does not easily allow for the pollen in the air to enter the flower, so it doesn't cross easily. Here's some pictures of different flowers. So we've got a rose, and that is an example of a perfect flower. It's got both male and female parts. You've got the anther and the stigma. And then the zucchini, you can see that there's a male flower and a female flower. And the way that you can tell that it's the female flower, that it looks like it has a baby squash at the end. It's more, well, yeah, it looks like a baby squash with a flower coming out. And so you may think, oh, this one's been pollinated because I can already see the fruit. That's not true. It's already there because it's the female flower. That's the ovary that is there. And if it doesn't get pollinated, that baby zucchini will just drop to the ground. It won't keep growing. But if it does get pollinated, then it grows into a zucchini. And then the male flower just has a very simple straight stem. And then you've got a big blow up of the different parts of flowers. And a picture of a closed flower, the pollen is on the inside of the cone of anthers, and the pollen collects on the stigma inside the cone. And this, tomatoes are sort of a closed flower. They don't need pollination. They're self-pollinators. Yes, bees do go to them because the bees are attracted to the nectar and they want to get that nectar, but they are not relying on those bees to go from flower to flower to bring the pollen to different flowers. What the bee is doing is it's vibrating that flower and allowing the pollen to move around inside the flower and get attached to that stigma. That's why we use bumblebees in greenhouse tomato production, because the wind isn't there to sort of buffet the flowers. Some other pictures of male and female flowers. So you can see a close-up. You've got that, mini squash is the female flower. And then on the inside, you've got, you can see the one with the pollen is the male anther, and the other one below it is the female flower. So going back to cross-pollination a little bit, like I said, they have to be in the same species if you want them to cross. And if you don't want them to cross, you need to be thinking about not planting them maybe next to each other. I'll talk a little bit in a moment about how to keep them separate. So again, this is an example of, we've got a cabbage here. So it's in the Brassica family. And so Brassicaceae family, genus Brassica, and the species is Oleracea. And so those will cross. And the one below, I press the button, yeah, there's my check mark. One below, you can see in the species, one is Oleracea and the other is Rapa. Those will not cross. Some signs of poor pollination when you've got those deformed fruits. So if you've ever grown cucumbers and sometimes at the very end gets kind of skinny and weird looking, that means that the flower wasn't fully pollinated. Corn, if you get corn and it's got missing sections, that didn't get great pollination. Or peas, again, you're picking peas or beans and you've got some nice plump ones in the center, but at the far end, they're teeny tiny, or there's sometimes even peas missing in the center. Those are all instances of poor pollination. So now I'm going to move on to population size and why do we care about population size? And when I'm talking about population size, I mean like the number of plants of that crop that you're growing. So a lot of us, maybe we've just got 1 or 2 tomato plants on our deck, and we need to know if I do that year after year, am I going to get viable seed from that? And will I maintain that variety that I'm saving seeds from? And then some folks are concerned with long-term preservation projects, seed banking, conservation efforts, and they want to ensure that those seeds retain a high level of their existing genetic diversity. And in that case, you would need a much higher population size. So a great resource for that is on the Seeds of Diversity. I tried to click on this. Let's see if I click on it. Will it go to it? Otherwise, I've got it open in a tab. Okay, here we go. So go down here. So this is also on the Seeds of Diversity website, but there it's available as a PDF, and I wanted you to be able to see it without me downloading a PDF. So hopefully you can see it's a little bit small. Actually, I think one of them is bigger. Here we go. So it's got the crop and the species, the family, life cycle, Is it annual, perennial, biennial? Biennial means that it flowers in its second year. What's the primary pollination method? And we were talking about population size, so I'm going to skip over recommended isolation distance. But it gives you 3 different columns for population size. So you've got how many plants do you need to have viable seeds. So that means that when you collect those seeds, you will get seeds that you can then, like this one's carrot, you will be able to get carrot seed from that.
Lisa?
Yep.
So your screen share is still your PowerPoint and it didn't go, we can't see the website you clicked on.
Oh, okay. Let me just see if I can share. There we go. Now you should see it. Yes?
Yep.
Yeah, good. Okay. So like I said, crops, it's got the crops, the species, the family, the life cycle, the primary pollination method, and then we're talking about the population size. So viable seeds, you can see it's usually a pretty small number. I think I was talking about tomatoes earlier, and I think they're just 1 plant. Yeah, 1 plant. But if you want to maintain a certain variety, then you'll want 5 to 10 plants. And I can't see what the number is because I've got all the little boxes of people's names, but I think it's, let's see if I scroll up. No, I can't see that box. But anyways, it's higher. You can all see it. I can't see it. So now if I go back to my PowerPoint presentation, I think I have to switch back. So maybe what I think that my next slide was going on isolation distances. So because I have this up, I'll talk about isolation distance. So if you are worried about crops cross-pollinating, so why would you be worried about cross-pollinating? If you're just saving seed and you don't have a particular variety that you're trying to maintain, you're just wanting seed and you're happy to get whatever, then fine, you don't have to think about cross-pollination. But if you have, let's say, some beans that have been passed down in your family, or you know that they're heirloom seeds and you want to keep that variety going year after year, you want to think about, are you planting any other beans that year? And if you are, how far away do they need to be in distance? Now, I'm also going to talk about some other ways of isolating, but in terms of distance, this is what this chart helps you figure out. So this one here's soybean. You need to have different varieties 10 to 20 feet apart. And that's because the bean plants also are perfect flowers and they tend to self-pollinate. Yes, the bees go to them, and that's why you need to have some separation, but they tend to not go a long way in between crops. So if you've got like a 10-foot row of soybeans of one variety, and then maybe you've got a few other rows of maybe some tall flowers, and then your other variety of soybeans, you probably won't get crossing in between. But like, let's look at something here like Swiss chard is wind pollinated. So you need like 800 feet to a mile, or 244 meters to 1.6 kilometers in between those different chard varieties. So not a lot of us have that kind of land that we can dedicate to growing different Swiss chard varieties. So in a moment, I'll talk about what you can do if you're wanting to save different chard varieties. So I'm going to stop share here and go back to my PowerPoint presentation. Oh, and I think it's gone back to the first. Yeah, now I'm gonna have to go back here. Oh, good, it saved my spot. That's amazing. Okay, so we're talking about isolation. Isolation stops the unwanted cross-pollination between varieties of the same species. So you can isolate by distance, and that's what I was talking about, but you can also isolate by the timing of flowering or by containment. So when I say the timing of flowering, you can say, okay, I know that it takes 30 days from seeding to when this crop of beans is going to be flowering. And this other variety is pretty similar. So I'm going to plant this variety and I'm going to wait 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks maybe. And then I'm going to plant this other variety of beans. And in that way, when the first variety is flowering, you don't have anything else flowering. Now, sometimes beans is maybe not the best example because they will continuously flower if you are continuously picking. If you're not continuously picking, then maybe it won't be flowering anymore by the time the next set is flowering. So containment, that is by using row covers and netting. As I mentioned, self-pollinated crops need less isolation distance. Cross-pollinated crops need greater. Same with wind, need quite a long distance between crops. Physical barriers. So I'm just going to summarize what this slide says, but basically you can decrease cross-pollination by having buildings and trees and shrubs in between your crops. It's not guaranteed to stop cross-pollination, but if you don't want to be using netting and you don't want to be using different times of flowering, then planting at one side of your property and having a house or a fence or a hedgerow in between can stop cross-pollination, especially for insects, because they get distracted before they get to the next crop. So they'll probably go to both, but maybe not in the same day. You can also plant pollen-rich flowers in between, and that stops the insects from traveling from one variety to the next. And like I said, they minimize these barriers and distractions, minimize cross-pollination, but it's not a guarantee. So that's why we use physical barriers, row cover and netting. And if you have perfect flowers that don't require insects, then you can leave the netting on all the time. And if you do require insect or wind, I mean, I feel like the wind still gets in. Well, no, yeah, you'd need the wind pollination. You'd need to take it off as well. But what you can do is have it open on different days. So let's say you've got a row of Swiss chard and you've got 2 varieties and they're planted in the same 1 acre space, which is too close. You're going to get cross-pollination. So you've got that row cover on it, and one day you take the row cover off of the one variety for the whole day or a number of hours, and then you put it back on. And then the next day you take the row cover off of the other variety. You can also use hoop houses or greenhouses with screen on the doors. That just helps for some of the flowers that are really, usually it's wind pollinated. It's just that it's so easy for them to get cross-pollinated. Like I'm thinking of carrots because they cross-pollinate with wild carrot, which Queen Anne's lace, and there's so much of it around. And because it's wind pollinated, there could be Queen Anne's lace on all these other properties that you don't know about. And maybe you've made sure that there isn't any flowering on your property, but your carrots could still be cross-pollinated by the Queen Anne's lace. So that's why I think a greenhouse or a hoop house for something like that would work with screening on the windows, because you still need some air on those hot days. You need some way of venting.
Hi, Lisa, it's Steve.
Yep.
Just a quick time check. You're at 1:30.
Yep. That's good. I think I've got another 5-ish minutes and then we can go to questions. Sound good? So when you're collecting seed, you want to make sure that the seeds are mature so that they are well developed. You see this picture of the beans. They've got nice big bean seeds inside the pod. And you also want them to start drying. Now with beans, you can pull out the whole plant if they're mature, but they're not dry yet. You can pull out the whole plant and hang them somewhere to dry if you don't want to leave them in the field, because often the rains set in the fall, and then you end up with rotting beans before you can collect them. So I often pick them through the season because I'm picking beans to eat, but I leave some of them to develop into seeds. So you can pull out the plant or cut it at the bottom, but serious seed savers tend to pull out with the roots and shake off the soil because there's still nutrients from the root that's going into those seeds until they're completely dry. So hang them or lay them flat for 2 to 3 weeks. You want to make sure that those seeds are super, super, super dry. And then you can thresh them, so break them up, break all those outer coatings off and remove the seeds. You can use a sieve, to remove the debris and the dust. And it depends on what you're using the seed for. I didn't thresh my seeds for a long time. I was just using them myself, and it wasn't a big deal when I needed the beans. I just opened the pods back in the spring, or I have this giant bag of kale that has all the seeds in there, and I just scrunch it a little to break them out of their pods, and they all fall to the bottom of the bag. I cut a hole in the bottom of the bag and pour them out. Some seeds we call wet seeds, and those would be tomato, squash, cucumber, melon. And so those are in the fruit, right? So you're going to wait until the fruit is a bit past ripe, and you would cut them open and remove the seeds and lay them out to dry them. It can be easier to remove some of the gunk from the seeds if you put them in water for a day and sort of stir them around and then strain them and lay them out on paper towel to dry. They say that you can get better seed germination if you let them ferment. So that's putting them in a jar of water for a couple of days until the mold, you can see in the picture there's a bit of mold growing at the top, and then you would pour more water in and strain out the mold and strain out the gunk. Once you've got nice clean water and clean seeds, you spread them out on paper towel to dry. You want to make sure that they dry really, really well before storing them. So like I said, you want to make sure they're super dry. You want to store them in a cool, dry place. You want the temperature to be consistent. It doesn't really matter, it doesn't have to be 5 degrees or something, but you don't want it super hot, and being dry is the key factor. You can put them in jars, you can put them in paper bags, you can put them in Ziploc bags. You want to label them, label them with what the seed is and the year, because let me tell you, once you have 5 bags of the same seed and it all looks the same, you think you'll remember, but you won't. Quickly, the shelf life, like I said, dry and cold, they'll last the longest, and you'll get the best germination. Viability, some seeds last longer than others in storage. I have tomato seeds over 5 years, and I always get really good germination from them. Stuff like carrot and parsnip and all of the seeds in the onion family don't really store for more than a year. So a way to do a simple germination test is to take a moist paper towel and put your seeds out on the moist paper towel and then stick it in a plastic bag. Don't seal the bag, but it's really just to help keep the moisture in, but you don't want it to be like stagnant moist air, because then that's when mold grows. And you just watch every day, or maybe, you do some research online. How long does it take for lettuce seed to germinate? Oh, it could be germinating in 3 days. So you look every day to look for the little root hairs coming out. And then you count how many have germinated. And, let's say you started 10 seeds, so you got 5 to germinate, you've got 50% germination. Okay, so now we can open it up for questions. I put a couple of resources down there. Seedsavers.org is a really great website. And I also put the tool library website. You can see the Guelph Seed Library page. And you can also contact me if you have questions at farmeducation@ignatiusguelph.ca. And you can also contact the Guelph Seed Library info at guelphtoolllibrary.org and just say it's about the seed library. And Susan Carey is our current coordinator, and she will get in touch with you. So Andrew, I didn't talk about tree saving seeds. I have not done a lot of that myself. We do have somebody who is just started volunteering with the Guelph Seed Library, and he is interested in saving tree seeds, and I think he's been doing it for a few years. So we will start to have some tree seeds. They're just, from what I know, they are different in that you don't dry them out. They need to stay moist to stay viable. So like I have pawpaw seeds in my fridge wrapped in a paper towel, moist paper towel. And I believe that most tree seeds need to stay moist. Any other questions? So you can either type them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask away. You're welcome.
Lisa, it's Steve.
Yeah.
I think the seed library keeps seeds in a refrigerator. Is that kind of the recommended temperature, or what's your thinking on that?
So we don't anymore because we changed spaces and we're not in Tytler. And the reason that we had them in a fridge was that we were on the 3rd floor of a very old school, and it was like a sauna in there in the summer, and we weren't going to be getting that even temperature that I talked about. And so we decided that the only way we could have the seed library there was if they were in a fridge. I don't keep them in a fridge at home. My basement is on the cool side. I mean, it's not 10 degrees in here. It's, you know, it's probably ranges between 15 and 18. It's mostly don't let them get too hot. Yeah. Like me, one time I had them in a tub, and I wasn't farming where I live, so I'd put the seeds in the tub and drive to the farm, and I'd use them, and then I'd come home, and sometimes I'd be tired, and sometimes I'd leave the tub in the car, and those seeds got kind of cooked from being left in the car. Irene, how do you get seeds from beets? So beets are like chard. They are a biennial. So what you can do is grow your beets. And if you have a way to protect them over the winter, like put heavy amount of straw over them, then they come up the next year, and then they will send out flowers and you'll get seed. But if you are wanting a particular variety, I mean, you've got more control because there isn't anything wild that will cross with it, but just make sure you don't have any Swiss chard growing nearby that could cross with your beets, because the chard and the beets can cross. If you are lucky enough to have like a hoop house or a cold frame, or you can dig up your beets and put them in there over the winter in the ground. You can also dig up the beets and store them like in a root cellar, and then in the springtime, probably around, I've never done it this way, but I've seen people do it. May, June, I think maybe, you would plant them again in the ground, and you'd get flowers. Yeah. from beets. I forgot that I have some Swiss chard seed that I have been saving. I don't know if you can see it, but they're pretty funny little prickly seeds that come off. And so I would just be pulling them all off of the long stalks and saving them. Any other questions? We've got like a couple of minutes more. The seed library is taking seed requests now. We just opened last week for seed requests. So if you are on Facebook, join the Guelph Seed Library Facebook group and look for the thread that says requests, and you put in your request. There's an inventory there listed so you can see all the seeds that are in inventory, and the volunteers will put together your seed order, and you can either pick it up from the tool library, or in some cases I think you can maybe pick it up from Susan's house. And if you're not on Facebook, contact the Guelph tool library and say, I'm not on Facebook, can you send me the inventory? And I believe there's like a Google form that you can see the inventory and then fill out to request seeds. It's so much more complicated than it used to be. It used to be you could just go to the tool library and look through the fridge and take what you needed, but hopefully we will get back to that sometime, maybe the end of this year or next year. It'll be less sort of awkward. If the spinach plant bolts, can you plant seeds that same season? Yes, if you get viable seeds, you can plant them right away. I have areas in my garden that are sort of a little bit on the wild. They're sort of my self-seeding areas, and I've got arugula, and it bolts and it gets the seed pods, and I either just leave it there and then they'll all shatter and fall and grow arugula the next year, or sometimes I help it along and I'll go and I'll just rub my hands and scrunch the tops to make the seeds fall. Yeah, anything that flowers and produces seed that year, you can replant right away. If you have a hoop house and you plant lettuce or kale or really any of the greens, early greens, if you plant like them now-ish or even earlier, they will flower quite soon. Like I think last year I had lettuce that I planted in March, and I think it was flowering in June. And so I could have gone in there and harvested the lettuce seed and then replanted it. I didn't, because I didn't have time. I just collected it all. But yeah. Steve, is that it for our time?
We're pretty much there. We could probably take one more question if someone's got one that's burning, but just one more. But we don't need to belabor it either. Well, thanks everybody for attending. And Lisa, thank you so much for doing this. Lisa is kind of a fixture now on at the festival doing seed saving, and quite often she'll have the big table out in the Seedy Saturday space and have the seed swap and whatnot. But obviously we're not doing that this year. Hopefully next year.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yeah, let's do it next year.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I guess we're so blessed to have people like yourself in the community who are doing a lot of things to support local resilience, and especially around agriculture. I think it's one of the core things that we need to push aggressively into regenerative and ecological farming, and you're certainly one of the people that I admire for all the work you do there. So thank you.
Thanks,
so
Steve.
much. Yeah, so that concludes the session today. I know Lisa's given some contact information. So if you have any questions, please reach out and support the local efforts. Thanks again, everybody, and I hope you have a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.